Folks, tonight we have a breaking news story of lies, fraud, and betrayal of trust, all for money and fame, because that seems to be the top of our value system in America, where capitalism has taken us from caring about humanity to where a shopping list of material desires is called spirituality. Where's the courage and expansion of spirit? If the temporal world is always temporary, always shifting and changing, do we really want solicited and manipulated away from what is real, from real growth?
You blend fiction and nonfiction, things get a little slippery.
Truman used to always say, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
So watch out.
Why do people have to tell lies?
Usually it's because they want something. They're afraid the truth won't get it for them.
Her jest will savour but of shallow wit, when thousands weep more than did laugh at it. John asked me to keep him company during the public onslaught of hate, even before Taylor Swift lied, claiming a romantic relationship with him, which was actually a final blow in a forced, tense situation for power, access, and control at 20 years old. The public was not privy to the threat behind the scenes by a fully funded teenage manipulator, even though it was subtly, coyly forced to the press by paid agents. It was not real life. Letters to John, begun to him the 27th of April 2010 at the beginning of the last Jupiter, the cosmic crown, coming together with Uranus, the shocking awakener, as they are now again in this moment. We have collectively been through this together since 2010, with hate spread as the American norm over the planet. It was wonderful falling in love with him, and amazing having that love and comfort from him. The abusive climate of the public and press would not reach a crescendo until Taylor, a teenager, funded into a position of contact, already playing publicly into the role of white victim from Kanye provided by the press, and out of John's kindness, only having been invited to record a song, copied my Tumblr blog in relationship with John as her own story and ideas, and then moved to New York City, where John and I fell in love. Into the very neighborhood, one street over, trying to further the fabrication to make it sexual with a lover, to legitimize it in public view as a physical relationship, which it most certainly never was. She was and has been determined to publicly force a relationship, or at least sell the story of it, no matter whom she had to invade and harm. In fact, she gets pleasure and more narcissistic supply from lying, copying biographical material and intellectual property as her own and selling it, invading and harming. She has blatantly continued that abusive practice. For the artwork of every one of her albums, Taylor Swift was taking an arrogant teenage rich bitch shot on someone else's original artwork, and has continued to do so from the beginning in her paid entry into the entertainment industry as a solicited child for fame and money, her parents' capital investment. This extends to all lyrics and actions as well. She has a malignancy on hearts and creators, the lifeline of being alive. John's kindness and being gorgeous, famous, extremely talented, and intelligent with incredible songwriting made him a target. He wasn't for sale. It wasn't real. Taylor Swift was trolling John online and trying to gain personal access. Nothing she sold as her own was original. She was grasping for identity and material. The movie Dear John came out in 2010, starring Amanda Seyfried. It was, "This is what I'm going to sell and you can't stop me." Cue Tom Petty's American Girl on the fraudulent Speak Now tour to pair with John's live cover of Free Falling. It was extreme personal and professional invasion, all for publicity and a good girl act to go with it. The press found it extremely lucrative and considered it no personal damage done. Why would real music matter to anyone as long as someone was profiting so hugely? Just as Truman Capote did not own adult, beautiful, intelligent, accomplished New York City women, they did not belong to him in the possessive sense that current authors want to perpetuate the abuse of. It is time to free them and their autonomy. The term swans Truman lifted from Willa Cather's Flavia and Her Artists, first published in 1905. Even before Truman's trying to emulate and steal identity from Marcel Proust's Swann's Way from À la recherche de temps perdu, thus the setting of La Côte Basque, 1965, to elevate himself, gain access, and abuse those withstanding, in other words, power and publicity. There was no masterpiece or final work Truman was emulating, Willa purposefully not finishing or publishing her hard punishments. She had very good reasons, set at the formal papal seat in Avignon. He was even copying the base of this by saying that his title was from St. Teresa of Avila. Truman's was a cover-up he was trying to perpetuate to the very last day of his life. His only claim to fame is his invasion of other bright lights' lives. His criticisms and condemnations of others was narcissistic tendency of splitting and projection from themselves, a documented abuse pattern. This was right when Katy Perry was born in 1984, always entering the cosmic picture, even to the lineage of Jimi Hendrix, Electric Ladyland Studios in Greenwich Village. Her mother had dated him, and her daughter Daisy Dove was born on the 50th anniversary of its opening. I lived alone on a ranch in southwest Texas at the time, where the narcissist's rendition of stalking and taunting to little girls her derogatory condescension of a sad, empty town instead of the gorgeous nature and Katie's fireworks, where I went home after seeing John in New York City in July 2010, before moving to the Lincoln National Forest in New Mexico the following year. In other words, a Christmas tree farm which would suddenly appear out of nowhere, just like suddenly Taylor went to Catholic and private schools, had an opera singer grandmother, and named herself after James Taylor because of my name and Neil Diamond's song Shiloh, and the invisible friends of John's half of my heart. Truman Capote also lied constantly about his biographical history to give himself a matching storied past to try to make the artwork more true to him than it was, trying to make himself be somebody, for Taylor is copying details that I write about in order to make herself special instead of the literary and cosmic hand that I show at work. All place in the mountains and forests of New Mexico, the old ranch with a house from the 1930s where I lived, and a 175-year-old Texas stone home on a creek and a little pond in Fredericksburg, Texas, were an inheritance from my dad and his ranch and trust partner, Faye Engen Hewitt Kelly, a woman who loved the West as much as Willa Cather. Her family were some of the founders of the small Texas town of Comfort outside of Fredericksburg and Lukenbach. Her father owned a grocery store in Comfort all the years of her growing up. After my dad's retirement from being a Methodist minister, he managed and worked on the ranches in Texas, a land he dearly loved. My dad and I and my brother made a Western together there. My dad is buried in a live oak grove on the ranch in Texas. It is how I've been able to take the freedom to live alone and write, on a tiny budget of course, and a wealth of unfathomable treasure as Willa showed, and the price of freedom and solidity so worth it. It has been my Huckleberry River, my way to adventure, explore, and escape abuse. It isn't just fame and money that is at stake. In capitalism, power and money are God, and nothing else matters. Not humans, not the planet, and most of all, not being. Dehumanizing others works well and is too easily praised. It is all fodder for dollars, even language, the basis of poetry that opens and reveres life itself, the thing that saves us. Songwriters and musicians have to be for sale. That further grasping hand of money from Pennsylvania could hide a daughter under the cloak of creativity, masquerading as music and art, the realm of true human expression, as money and marketing could now buy fame. It just needed to look and sound like everything else. There was nothing not for the taking. The American easy story that sells also just had to match the stock story, as Willa Cather described it. Youth, love, and success. How she got the boy and how she succeeded in business. That matches capitalism and can be sold as marketed propaganda, as love story, magic, then selective charity as coercive headlines on every newsstand in the world, given enough money, and everyone is led to the mechanistic slaughter.
Even were concerned with the mysterious adventures of that thing we call the soul. But they believed that literature was dedicated to the telling of these two stories over and over throughout the centuries. Of course, such an opinion could only hold in a country with a shallow culture and an even shallower experience of life, which is a much more serious thing.
But capitalism crushes all the other lies beneath it, except for those brief few temporary instances of publicity, charity donations, and tax write-offs. And every living thing in the planet still suffers, and it doesn't matter as long as it's powerful and famous. The structure that erases life stays the same, and of course narcissists want that. They like to call suffering. They have for the history of humanity. It has to be all about them, and them in control. Narcissism, the scourge of humanity, takes it to its furthest. As we will see in a moment where this is going, when that greedy hand in grasping for false identity crosses the boundaries even past crushing humanity, given the opening, reaches into the sacred, into the place of being, as Dante shows in the Inferno. The hell on earth is created by the very worst and depths of that, even past gluttony, greed, and wrath, to the fraud monster that always shows up at the sign of the sacred, just as happened to John in his divine guitar playing, singing, and songwriting, the showing of his soul. And this is where that demonic appetite, its unquenchable internal turmoil, like Taylor Swift in the turbulent language in Homer's trapped underworld, becomes the greatest, and tears, rips, and pulls down from there, on earth, to heresy, violence, fraud, and treachery, betrayal at the bottom of what should have been a fellow musician who was given golden trust, but instead had the intent to rip apart anything of extreme beauty. And yet, as Willa shows, that this is an inverted love story. As one of her contemporaries described in her speech on the subject, it is negative love, hate depicted as a tribute to the paramountcy of love. The characters we want most to present are the characters whose charm we have felt most strongly. Those are the rarities that have naturally or radiantly stood apart from the rest. But hate is a fruitful emotion, but it has not produced great literature. Dante's Inferno and the whole Commedia is inverted evil, hatred of evil because of the love of good. The great characters in literature are born out of love, often out of some beautiful experience of the writer. From Willa Cather's speech in May 1925 at Bowdoin College. John knew what he was doing when he started out, and as he carefully, thoughtfully progressed, knew the place it was coming from within him, staying true, and he kept to it in the face of evil, in the face of that evil reaching to punish for the very beingness. That's how we know love, through the depths of hate. Willa, a careful master of literature and writing, told an audience at the Plaza Hotel in New York City in 1933 for the Pulitzer Prize ceremony.
We have begun to look about us, but we have reached no glorious goal. There's a long way to go. We've changed the old formula a little. Just now we throw the accent a little more heavily on the bad girl instead of the good girl, on the young man who is the young rowdy who is kicked out of the great corporation instead of the polished young man who becomes its president. But we cling to the formula. We must have that rough practice underneath it. We won't face the fact, we haven't the courage to face the fact that it's the formula itself that is beneath it. Frame up.
And here's where it becomes dangerous, as humanity has shown time and time again, blindly leading to mass suffering and bloodshed. Why people follow malignant narcissists, why their manipulations work. And a quote from Frank Yeomans from Borderliner notes, "What really drives people are raw emotions and the need to feel good about oneself, often facilitated by the need to criticize or vilify an outsider or an outside group. So I don't see an antidote. I wished I could. I think there still is the capacity for people to think, and we have to try to appeal to that. The question is how much damage needs to be done before people come to see the risks involved with these developments." Homer, the poet with the lyre in the dining hall, circa 750 BC, had the answer, the path around personal and cultural destruction. Poets such as Virgil and Dante carried this through, showing both the hell on earth of Western culture, its cause and its saving grace, all in art, poetry, and song by the world masters. This is our hope, our destiny. Taylor Swift is the epitome of what money, and not even within a creative sense of aesthetics or beauty, let alone the sublime, can by itself catch, that nothing creative of the human spirit and sacred is off limits to greed and its destruction, except the very real, which are the harms of capitalistic American culture, as Willa was showing at the beginning of the 20th century, where her prime subject was the female, and what could be the more natural, stronger roots of American culture differed from the rape of the populace by the gluttony and deliberate blindness of moguls. It looks different to us because the star, forcing herself into the limelight incessantly and not a natural star, is female and daring, aggressive and invasive, but it is actually just as offensive, harmful, and segregating as the Gilded Age monopolizers such as J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and Andrew Carnegie, who let the masses struggle and suffer, even die at their hands. In Uvalde, Texas, while making my independent film in 2006, I presented to the city council how if they let the arts shine, the commerce in the city would follow. I began and ran a film society and a fundraiser for bronze plaques for the famous artists who had lived there or had been born there, like Matthew McConaughey. I knew that with successful art, people would be drawn to the town square again, and the businesses there would profit. The historic opera house would be alive. Greed of ego took over, and the bronze plaques were paid for by donations and cast, but never erected. They were kept there with a library in her library so she could have the draw. She had castigated me for planning my movie premiere at the Opera House for the 150th sesquicentennial, even though I had included over 200 Uvaldians and others in the independent film. In 2011, I went on to direct 3 wonderfully successful plays there, including the musical Chicago starring my dad. It is very hard to break through the greed and to get people to care. It takes a very different path. Greenwich Village, 25th of March, 1911. Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, now a building of NYU. 1 block away, where Willa Cather began breakfast at Tiffany's in a very different way. A fire caused the deaths of 146 garment workers, 123 women and girls, and 23 men, who died from the fire, smoke inhalation, falling, or jumping to their deaths. Most of the victims were recent Italian or Jewish immigrant women and girls aged 14 to 23. These are the bodies of the young who jumped to their deaths because their lives didn't matter to the greed, right off of Washington Square Park. The owners saved themselves and their own children by getting to the roof. The foreman, who could have saved all their lives, saved himself only and left with the keys to their locked sewing room doors. This is the gentrified Greenwich Village that Taylor Swift perpetuates by forcing herself into the art, the neighborhood of thinkers, even the very buildings and institutions of NYU. The abuse that Willa Cather was writing in that very neighborhood and likely caused a major shift in her career. When this immense tragedy occurred, Willa worked nearby at 44 East 23rd Street as editor of McClure's Magazine, a magazine known for uncovering fraud and corruption. It shows up immensely in her writing and what she cares about, the spirit of the feminine and immigrants and restructuring American culture without a breath of grandeur or condescension, just gorgeous insight and metamorphosis of what is that gets denied and erased by the crush of capitalistic greed. Cather had lived just 1 block over at 60 Washington Square, Park South, also now NYU. In 1912, she lived on the same street at 82 Washington Place as the tragedy of young lives at 2329 Washington Place. On the other side of the park that would show up so significantly in her work such as Coming Aphrodite, the actual first setting of Breakfast at Tiffany's. The year following these young deaths to the factory fire, she would publish her first story that would become Breakfast at Tiffany's, The Bohemian Girl. Leave to visit the freedom and embodied lands of the American Southwest and have the immense experience there of the ancient cliff dwellings beneath her feet in Walnut Canyon, Arizona, that would become the huge personal transition in The Song of the Lark, 1915, also substantial material of Breakfast at Tiffany's. Katy Perry would perform nearby at the Super Bowl 49 there in Arizona exactly 100 years later in 2015. With John Mayer there to witness her life-altering moment. It is the coercive reason why Taylor opened the Eras, named after I Showed Each to Be Fraudulent 2020 tour, there to a capitalistic parade of the city, money dominating, buying public opinion, and stalking the real. It is why she is ending it, as if it matters, in Vancouver, where John and I first saw each other in April 2010. When Willa became editor of McClure's magazine, she published an article on the sex trafficking of young girls in New York City in 1908, adding her own poem, London Roses, to the end of the article.
Mon amour, je suis partie en voyage. Mon amour, mon amour, je suis partie en voyage. Et j'aime ça, excuse-moi.
Nah, they're too dumb, Truman said, while projecting that the public was also too dumb to catch what he was doing all around. As author Lawrence Leamer writes of the sensation around what Truman would release next and what was driving that public appetite for Capote that he lusted for, no one had ever gotten that close to these women in their elusive, secretive world. That supposed access, personal invasion, is exactly what Taylor is titillatingly selling, and selling it in the exact same way, claiming to be a literary genius when there are huge major holes showing she was copying everyone, like Truman was. An article in Literary Hub written by Leamer could be read to be the exact same tactics as Taylor, a likewise malignant narcissist with the exact same patterns of superiority, projection, grandiosity, invasion, actually selling harmful tabloid as reality, and supposed close personal relationship for sale. And like Truman's version, Taylor believes the public is too stupid to know what she's selling and flaunts the plagiarism in their faces with Taylor's version, assuming and profiting on that there can't be an advancement in consciousness. The pernicious frame-up of story of success in terms of the outworn paradigm of conquering as heroic, and love in those terms, and call it love when we know that that isn't what love actually is from our own human experience. Love is caring at its most elemental. We must admit an advancement in understanding, and understand that heroics and love are not conquering the structure our culture is built on. To alter that cultural structure, as author Lee Edwards demonstrates, we alter what is heroic, what we necessarily need changed, by a move from the old untruths that were pernicious and contained us within lives of untruths, and an advancement of understanding, and simply, at the elemental level, that caring is heroic. Psyche and Eros, 1st century AD. Eros' trajectory is the story of the transformation of love and the human conception of it that has been idealized, but needs altered as it is unworkable on earth. From the lineage of love as jealousy, that which gave birth to him, Venus, the world's conception of love as surface appearances, by his refusal to waiting out the true elements of what love actually is, as the elements become more evident. Eros only visits Psyche in the dark in a spiritual way, showing the dimension of physical and erotical love without the physical. As Lee Edwards points out, it's a very human mythological tale in that Psyche is not helped by the gods, and yet it is her trials that will give insight into perceptions of human love and the divine. And then love can be shown to go far, far deeper into caring beyond unnaturally set societal boundaries and restrictions. Heroic boundary crossing is also opposed to personal invasions, as in war. The cultural structures then shifted much further because of what Psyche does in her intense, unrelenting isolation, even into the depths of hell alone. What is transformed is not just the physical, our approaches to the natural and social, but also of the endurance into the realms where love and caring must go, which is also the supernatural. Why did things go this way? Whose breath did it? Did she love enough to cause it? The metaphysical. How are you with me outside of form in my breath, wherein I can feel you touching me in every cell? Even the way the cosmos works revealed within Psyche's tasks. If one could then imagine, Psyche's heroics then go even further even more courageous, and most certainly still not in a conquering, aggressive, forceful, warring, combative, invasive way. She defies the limitations of the cultural gods themselves and the culture's old, worn, unworkable set, harmful, false values. In other words, love as narcissistic jealousy or surface appearances of love, as what is divine or famous in lieu of true eternal, doing it not as a star for grandeur, or loudly calling it love for false conquest or old values, but as mere endurance and exploration of the depths of love, simply as a human breaking through to the true eternal, transformation and endurance of love into the very real and divine nature of the bonds themselves, and where it takes us here on earth, what it opens beyond, altering what has defined our values and our very gods themselves. Our conceptions are altered. Eros is thus also transformed into this human realm, and through newly altered conception of what is divine, love itself and its human embodiment. Thus her courage took on societal conceptions and values and opened them to the real and knowable by her defiance. Because true, eternal, internal radiance has been closed, she opens the box of beauty into her own internal radiance, a conception formerly withheld by jealousy and emptiness posing as famous, divine, a very limited cultural conception. Thus it is a completely different world through metamorphosis or apotheosis for every human, through the art, its very real function. Not false art, narcissistically as look at me and what I own from others, a horrible world, a hell on earth. According to Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, the sorting the seeds as Psyche must is being mindful of every detail, beginning with the body, with each part, and taking care to be in the body in every part, and carefully healing it so that you understand its wonder of existence. And then one can take care of every emotion. Deep into this is an inner stillness that allows one to come home to oneself, to the inner being. This is where Psyche's transformation and understanding begins, in nature and in herself. In Dante's Inferno, the first steps into hell right after leaving the poets and ancient philosophers, and also is therefore what happens to a culture when this happens, is Francesca, who has plagiarized Lancelot and takes his story for her own and is left forever tortured, writhing in desire. So let's see how deep, far, and real life and literature can go. Where does it bring us? How can it alter culture reverently for a different structure that honors being?
Like mythology, like
Homer's Trickster, Odysseus and Laertes, Athena and Penelope. The feminine goddess history in Penelope's vault when she opens the door groans like a cow as the goddess Io is signaling Penelope's true identity, the goddess in human form, and from which she opens the realization of the song's epics by retrieving Odysseus' bow guitar, Homer's lyre, and the feminine and divine realization of Odysseus and now his true identity, and thus the true lineage of music, which the world thought was about the heroics of war and conquest, but are actually the songs about creating the place of peace from Odysseus' journey and transformation to change and open the worlds that have closed to the divine in form, transformed within form, and then through recognition of the songs and internal being of Penelope, the transformation of the external world through the realization of music and art, from Coyote weaves a song. Argus the monster with 1,000 eyes, watching everything, guarding Io or Penelope. A culture's definition of beauty and love based on outward appearances are the actual cause of the Trojan War and the fate of Western culture to its demise, to be found in Homer's songs. Mistaken and fatal values of the feminine brought into the light by the goddess Eros, while Helen risks everyone's lives without concern, actually trying to get everyone killed so long as she is the center of a love story. Quite the opposite. Western culture complies with the manipulation and the rest of the world follows our demise of lack of valuing what is internal, instead of all based on form surfaces, which Helen is just repeating from others. Why is this actually life or death for us, the inheritors of Western culture and its songs? Because it is about the internal being, or lack thereof, recognized of every giver or taker of life, those who can buy and manipulate it, disregarding the real and life itself, mimicking what real is, as Homer shows. Whether she opens you to the eternal of you within and without, as a mother's hand, or is hungry, empty, and dark inside and offers you poison to drink, to cloud your thinking, just as Helen does, saying that she loved Odysseus while she tried to get him killed, and as scholars have pointed out, trying to take over Odysseus' narrative as her own, personally and for a culture, so that you will be filled with confusion, conflict, war, and killing as a norm, just for her. As she stands cheering at a demise, a culture's symbolic mistaken value as false external beauty, dangerously lacking the internal, as the center of attention, while the well-intentioned sacrifice themselves for the hidden cultural downfall to death and slavery, where their lives and own beings don't matter, exactly what the symbolic Penelope and all women, and thus all life, are facing. This is the reality, and Helen just wants to be a star. This is aligned in our cosmos. Eros, a planet which has been conjunct our global future path, moved into warring and consciousness transformative Aries when Willa Cather was writing about the core of the different feminine in the early 1900s. Eros, having begun the war and pointing out that fatal cultural flaw, is conjunct my critical rising sign in Aries, critically square Pluto entering Aquarius. That Pluto has been in my 10th house of fame, on my midheaven for the course of this abuse, most especially since the immense Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January 2020, when I first published an expose of Taylor's malignant invasive narcissism. She's been ravagingly buying and copying music and throwing out non-stop albums and publicity since then, trying to silence me, demonstrating her domination over the press and her fans, and copying that I continue to write, no matter what she does. That Pluto of tearing down the old order in Capricorn moved to this critical degree, bringing about that moment that the old order would scream its loudest at its demise. In 2010, I accidentally threw in the Golden Apple, the prize of culture, that pointed out the difference of internal values by writing online. It infuriated a teenage Taylor Swift who could buy and loudly aggress her way. In 2008, Taylor Swift believed she could buy, take, or force anything she demanded, including people and intellectual property, having no knowledge, experience, or respect of life or creation, only manipulative financial practices, and from this thinking she could force the story of being considered to be the fairest. Homer, the bard concerned with music of a culture, shows the difference between Helen and Penelope, both from warring Sparta. Penelope is the daughter of Peribea, a water spirit. In Greek mythology, the naiads are a type of female spirit or nymph presiding over fountains, wells, springs, streams, brooks, and other bodies of fresh water. Between the two of them, one is a deadly repeater, her weaving trading on easy gossip instead of the eternal, a causer of conflict so that she can be the center of attention, but she's death, hell inside, and seeks harm, and may look like it is for feminism, but she is only interested in herself. And the other is weaving the poetry that opens life itself, the flow of life, opening the eternal being within, because she is life itself, the fact erased by a history of culture. Andromache's infant son is thrown over the protective wall, the symbol of the cultural inheritor of the sacrificial Hector, or the then coming cultural fall of Rome before it is even founded, and she herself is sent to slavery. Helen operates on repeated rumor and lies to kill others, as at her dinner she concocts at her home, just as Truman Capote did so that he could be seen as literary, a false pseudo-self, just as the raging Achilles. That causes a culture to suffer and finally fall to narcissism. A major clue in the inner difference is the empty, always-on, defensive, fight victim, instant reactivity and aggression, causing conflict at all times. And the epitome of the goddess of culture, wisdom and subversion of war, the cosmic warrior with deep inner stability of peace that matches the harmony, truth, and song of the cosmos, and then one knows what to sing to open life again in an unnaturally twisted culture. In advancing mental health, it is now widely understood that malignant narcissistic abusers want to empty you of you and want to fill you with themselves. From Dr. Les Carter. When you defy them with your own freedom and self, narcissism shows itself to be insidious, especially because they are miserably empty themselves and need others as suitor selves, which then comes out as hatred, jealousy, tearing down others, false ownership of others, and a need to lie and control at every turn. The goddess in the body is the flow of vibrant life through her, opening it to freedom and blooming of spirit to its fullest, the promise of America, not the stopping of it. Homer knew this, and it is shown in mythology that Helen is born of a shell to show what is inside that questionable shell, a form from an unnatural birth from a raped or a willing mother. Helen's siblings too, Clytemnestra, Castor, and Pollux, the Dioscuri, are clues to Helen's inner identity as well, and the question of being eternal or merely mortal. Artemis is the protector of all living things, all wild things, and when a mortal doesn't see the goddess in her, in other words her being, when it looks at her as just a body, with the wrong kind of eyes, as Taylor looked at me as a nobody even though she wanted my writing for fame, Artemis turns that twisted back natural and sends it back to its eternal self. She is the forerunner of the Hebrew biblical Eve, misrepresented and slanted by controlling and punishing narcissism, but before that, historically, with the same kind of powerful presence as a goddess of free nature, related to the shared epithet of Asherah and Eve, mother of all living things. Even a damaged and temporarily darkened Psyche, Persephone, taken against her will into the dark underworld from early or sustained trauma, has to move herself as her own kind, careful mother to healing in the body, and finally to growth and blooming, to fruit and abundance for all, the earth in full bloom, and not creating a hell of abuse for everyone else, dragging them down into her trapped inner hell to stay and perpetuating it, but moving toward new, deeper rooted expressions of life. This is why Psyche only learns it and does not stay. She pays her tokens. It is why Hermes lifts them up, the artist, the psychopomp between the worlds, the song, the hand of lifting transport. Extremely hard things happen to each of us. It is not a ticket to manipulate and harm others and call oneself victim while being the perpetrator. We must open that pain to extreme beauty. This is an ancient truth covered over when the feminine was obliterated in being able to live and have value. It is the death of the mother in us and disallowed in being at the ancient biblical city of Shiloh in ancient Canaan with the invasion of the Israelites. Penelope isn't weaving a shroud for a dying king. She's weaving a cosmic web of epic poetry where she herself is the bobbin, the center, the human goddess to be found. She's weaving a flag in their faces of the returning lineage of Hermes.
Won't you join me?
It is what Audrey Hepburn is in Breakfast at Tiffany's, and why she took the part when screenwriter George Axelrod showed her The Fraud, how Truman Capote had plagiarized it all from Willa Cather, stealing from the masterful feminine and putting himself as the center instead, just for money and fame, to be lauded as top New York City literati. Audrey knew resistance work from World War II, which happened in her own childhood neighborhood. Just as Audrey wears orange, the color of the Dutch resistance, during the day of being daring and doing things they'd never done before in Breakfast at Tiffany's, in other words, stealing, the movie is full of these allusions to Truman's arrogant transgressions and to bringing through the very real effect of Willa's and Audrey's powerful, not bound by time or war, feminine and artistic. In The Five and Dime, Holly first puts on a dog mask, takes it off, and replaces it with a cat mask, looks over to Paul and he nods yes, that's the thing she's going to steal, to keep her hand in it. Those references come straight out of Willa's Coming Aphrodite and Audrey herself keeping her hand in it. Willa's Eden Bower decides to take a hot air balloon ride dangling off the bottom in place of a female model, something she's never done before. In Willa's story, the cat is a dog living there on the square in Greenwich Village. Audrey's private life was her own, and because it was so special to her, she kept it sacredly to herself and removed to inviolate, intimate places, nurturing and protecting her beautiful sons, relationships, and giving all of herself to life, which can look mundane but isn't, and which is an alive legacy, and to this moment, her internal garden. It is how she protected and nurtured her inner spirit. From that vibrant spirit, she then naturally enlivened the art and even the cities to a live place from her own radiance in a reverberating, magnificent way, never having to even try, let alone having to force it with propaganda and marketing, false, forced, and pseudo-identity, purchased mansions, manufactured creation with hidden ghost creators, a false and borrowed narrative, and trying to mythologize herself without knowledge but through mimicry. She was all of the real, cosmically, naturally, perfectly. That creates a real, alive place on Earth. The other way is how to force a dead city. Audrey was authentic, completely real, and she was and is pure magic that resonates far beyond the harsh mental boundaries, and thus also beyond form and time. These are the effects that Willa was showing. What Truman could never have done is he fed on socialites and trying to withhold Holly's true identity from them having it. Power over the richest women in the world, what he had stolen for his own desperately empty ego, then trying to retain it only for his empty self. Dear friend and literary agent Irving Swifty Lazar begged her to write her autobiography. She declined an exorbitant amount of money to have her life as her own, and the right and intimacy to speak of no one else, of protecting her dear relationships and showing respect to them, and whose love and adoration was always evident of how they all dearly loved her, clearly fell in love with her, adored her in lifelong closeness. How often really do you see that? And she not even to speak of what Truman had done, or what she had done to change the course of culture. Audrey's free, pure, and courageous spirit is everything, and it makes all the difference. It makes the world. She is the antithesis of the rape of capitalism, war, and destruction. She is powerful in a very different sense, a very important difference of the feminine and artistic. In practical Buddhist terms, this difference, kind of immense power, comes from confidence in oneself's inner capacity and capabilities to go further, and diligence, mindfulness, concentration, and insight, a very careful and inner approach to a different world, put together with a feminine artistic, is an entirely different planet. The basis of this difference is the smallest taking care, as a passion, with love. This is the transmission and nourishment of humans and culture. The cult of narcissism says life cannot be sacred. We will not allow you yourself. We must tear everything down for tentative power. We will throw slop at you to eat as we did in concentration camps, just so we can be somebody. And during human history, there often has had to be resistance work in the marginal spaces outside of prevailing powers where wildflowers bloom, such as when the press and dissemination of truth is controlled by unchecked propaganda, perpetuating unawareness. One wouldn't think so, but Willa Cather's writing is resistance work. She was carefully and ingeniously detailing the transmission and inheritance, concerned with its transmission and inheritance, and the details of a very different kind of American culture in place, not raped by capitalistic greed. Exquisite, careful heritage of French cooking, for example, Willa holds to a standard comparable to the care of life as a religion. Author A.S. Byatt writes of this: "It is as important to her that the missionaries bring excellent soup, well-roast lamb, wine for the table, and methods of gardening to the culture of New Mexico as that they bring true doctrine or even a cathedral." And then she combines that feminine and care of life as the truer basis of the sacred, truer to life, and then showing the opening of the divine in the Pure Land, natural abundance, bounty, freedom of body and spirit, even joy follows that. And this is where it begins to come together. The care taken in a sensuous meal and the nourishment of life in its finest, most refined details from the earth, as in Provence, and from centuries of cultural refinement of life experienced as art, as that to which art points and exalts with very present reason, as opposed to an abstract God or off-limits Mary, is comparable to taking communion, but inside the home where the care of core and body is center, as by it compares, however eternally still its landscape, whatever peaceful human eternity of repetition is found in the actions of celebrating Mass, a cooking and a gigget. Willa, as a genius writer and knowing that own being and body of herself, instead of the ripping apart of lives, was placing the structural modes of transmission of culture, religion, legends, paintings, mythology, historical narratives, folk songs, right next to this natural, grounding, compelling, and radiant effect of the feminine when it is carefully open to the further dimensions within itself and its lineage of life and art, working in those very modes of cultural transmission in their simplest structural terms, no bigger than it is, while purposefully showing the truer, more verifiable, more resonant, naturally compelling force, a cathedral next to the female body, the miracle itself, no embellishment, even beyond brown skin. A little girl, French cultured, yet transplanted as her own pilgrim on a rock in Quebec to bloom her differently, bringing that careful culture from French history of a very different feminine foundation, Leonardo's Virgin of the Rocks, she the actual rock, solid as the earth and alive, not displaced, on which the immigrant church, even the old church, the new culture is sprouted from, built upon, she the structure, and importantly with the new freedom of spirit and liberty, the birther of new, free, open worlds, with natural reverence for the things that matter. Willa was also giving careful attention to detail of the land itself being feminine in its actuality, and thus the immigration to it carried forward differently, to grow from different roots, to bloom into a vibrant garden on earth, the natural paradise it was dreamt to be. This was no rape, conquering or forcing submission to a Spanish or Anglo narcissistic invasion as rugged individualistic settlers in a Wild West, a very masculine rendering of culture that Willa was seeing manufactured firsthand as editor at McClure's magazine. Willa's 1915 novel, The Song of the Lark, places the to-be-realized feat of the female on Arizona's ancient indigenous cliff dwellings at Walnut Canyon for a realization of her actual primordial lineage, emerging as the cores from the prehistoric caves of southern France, the womb of the cosmos, just as Antonia's children come bursting forth from the cellar in the ground, and to the realization of her own body and being, here on this continent that awakens her to her own path and operatic voice. That voice becomes the center and the draw of culture in New York City after it diligently learns its cultural roots from centuries of the learned greatest inspirations and its glorious discipline in Europe. Katy Perry, with her Super Bowl 49 performance near Walnut Canyon, is that embodiment, and another instance of Katy walking in cosmically at the exact moment, such as being born at Truman Capote's passing in 1984, at which moment he last wrote the lies about Willa Cather trying to cover his plagiarism of Breakfast at Tiffany's and desperately trying to hold on to his eternal fame by having obfuscated minds, while Katy is the real eternal thing, arrived again and again. The original character of Holly Golightly from Willa's Clara Vavrika in her The Bohemian Girl is brown-skinned. Audrey herself was multilingual, multicultural with a Bohemian European royal heritage, not rigidly American Anglo, and engendered New York City with an undeniable, alive, new, indomitable spirit and joy, what capitalism could never create or be as internally powerful as. Willa's Eden Bower in her Coming Aphrodite has a free summer in Greenwich Village all to herself, to be freely herself, and to question what her path in art is. Is it to become a master like Don Hedger, or rich and famous with all the luxuries? In 1920, she does yoga in the nude and makes love on a fire escape rooftop. But when the summer is over, she will sell herself to money and luxury and become a huge success with her name headlining up in lights, but never physically realize the human goddess of potentiality she was in that very free moment in Greenwich Village, the garden of cultural Eden and possibilities of realizing the core of art and culture, the thing itself that art is about, and the very different societal structure she was capable of. That realization Willa laid ahead for us, even in the character of Hedger, who, like Aphrodite, is placed in the position of a sculpture of Jesus and his true identity off the coast of Marseille. For me, it arrived in coming to know John there in Greenwich Village in 2010, and I knew what he was. It wasn't to be missed, and Providence started to bloom, even in the prophetic of Willa's works coming to life and in the artist's physical realizations, such as Selena Gomez, wherein we can realize what that essence, that core, and the body and being are. It was a wild view of the possibilities of American culture founded differently on the feminine, and the present witnessable realness of it, and its truer effects in a culture built on deceptive, life-raping structures. Where we can see this is that Audrey's effects are knowable. Movies were the transmission, but it was Audrey's spirit that gave it life. Willa's masterpieces also had these effects and moved luminously, just as Audrey was first asked to go to New York City by the preeminent French female writer Colette. American culture and capitalism did not produce Audrey Hepburn. Exactly Willa's point. Alongside this, Willa was demonstrating how capitalism's booming norm of pillage, rape, and murder for the railroad moguls, for example, during the Gilded Age, was stealing the life, body, and soul of immigrant culture, their sense of community, song, story, land, and spirit that they brought with them that was very different from the rigid moralities growing that grab for power and money as the American structure. That aliveness of culture was worthless to American dollars, just as Taylor Swift demonstrates with her financial lineage, pillaging and raping a fraudulent path into music for fame and money, like a Sun magazine gossip columnist, putting herself in a starring role and selling it as true through paid marketing. It's the rape of the real. She's the molester of the true possibilities of the feminine in America. Truman Capote didn't care he was stealing from the masterful feminine, so long as he could be the loudest and most visible famous person there was, even trying to show his inner turmoil on national television, as Taylor is doing trying to show her inner turmoil in the latest tactic for attention. Truman was still trying to cover up those lies on his tormented deathbed. A narcissist always remains a victim, no matter what they've done. But Ernest Hemingway didn't care either, even the very best of the males, because it was feminine, but also knew it was the very best, unable to admit it or its importance. The National Willa Cather Center states on the opening of their website, Willa Cather is one of the most important American novelists of the first half of the 20th century. Seen as a regional writer for decades after her passing in 1947, critics have increasingly identified Cather as a canonical American writer, the peer of authors like Hemingway, Faulkner, and Warton. But Willa was blowing the canon away. Hemingway himself was most likely taking her ideas as his own, as from her the novel Du Meuble, and as documented of others such as Steinbeck trying to capture the very spirit of the feminine from her, as later Truman was, as likely Hemingway was, but Willa was just a woman, so it doesn't matter very much. In reality, she was brilliantly showing how to change everything and what the center of it is. That's why the replicas, Truman and Taylor, and their fraudulent versions are empty and dangerous for so many reasons. It's acting like it's transmitting culture while booming capitalism just for themselves, but the real of every living being is completely obliterated. Nothing and no one matters but them and what they desperately need to appear to be. There isn't actually care of, refinement, or mindfulness of life or art. What Willa writes of the power of the feminine is completely different. The effect that Audrey has is completely different. Taylor Swift was and is a Judas kiss to humanity, music, and culture with a smug smile on her face, imitating the real every step. Someone might say, well, Truman delivered Breakfast at Tiffany's, but he didn't. Screenwriter George Axelrod was bringing it back to Will in his writing, even in his talking Audrey into the part, bringing back the very real that still resonates, just as Willa was showing that it would. That's the arrival of Aphrodite. If they will throw you slop food and slop copied embroidery, slop art, never mind the care taken with every atom of wondrous life, They will throw you slop music with ingredients taken from others, even people paid to help them artificially look like something, not the real sacred and further, the real care of life. Audrey and Anne Frank were the same age in the Netherlands when the fascists invaded, experienced many of the same conditions. Directly following World War II, Audrey came to live in the same apartment building where upstairs Anne Frank's diary was being edited for publication after her death. Audrey, just as a girl in Amsterdam, was given that diary to read even before its publication, author Robert Madsen writes. Anne wrote of what she had lived through in it, and it seemed as if what happened to Anne had happened to her too, but Anne was dead, and Audrey would soon go on to global adoration. Later, Audrey was offered the role to play Anne Frank by Anne's own father, Otto Frank. Audrey Hepburn eternally quotes Audrey saying, "I didn't want to exploit her life and death to my advantage to get another salary, to be perhaps praised in a movie." I bring you comfort and care. Everything about you matters to me. You are held in and surrounded with love and tenderness, and always will be, even beyond birth and death. You can love, trust, and generate joy. Vanilla Custard Pudding, 2009 to 2021, is the little one who taught me courage. He showed me the most extreme beauty I've ever seen. He gave me the careful bonds of love I've longed for my whole life. I learned a Dharma body from him, my Buddha, my little wonder. He's alive in every cell of my body, in every breath. He is alive in everything with me. It is always us, and that is sacred. He made a sacred place for me of being alive. Together we found the deep, wonderful stillness underlying all this human activity. He was born with a little black bandit mask in a town where Pat Garrett had a son born in Texas. Somehow his whole life we lived near different trails of Pat and Billy the Kid from Texas into New Mexico, marking a remarkable escape to freedom in a story not told, but that we were living by being solid and free. It turns out that the ancient classical and Renaissance masters were also revealing this huge fundamental difference at the core, and how their subversive masterpieces, to outshine them all, were direly necessary. It took miracles produced by their own hands and set into motion to unfold. Together, Custard and I wrote Coyote Weaves a Song when our moonbeam passed, following the footsteps of my little ones, La Grande Ronde and La Petite Ronde, following our moon river to the realizations, from here to the Ardèche to Marseille, with astounding revelations every moment. I call my little vanilla custard pudding my ancient recipe, my golden yolk, my little bird. Like the sun, the recipe of eggs and milk is an ancient one in Roman times, especially in the south of France. He is the one who taught me the care of life and how to be a mother even past death, like in the Chauvet Caves, where we found our footsteps to still nurture and love. On Friday, the 10th of May, 1940, Audrey watched the fascist soldiers march into her neighborhood 6 days after her 11th birthday. Uranus was at 2151 Taurus. On Sunday, 21st of April, 2024, our Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is exact to that within 2 minutes at 2149 Taurus. We are reliving that very tense moment of her life, its first Uranus return, with a very different outcome because we have outgrown fascism and we know the value of freedom and truth. She was a little girl when she watched the extremists march into her neighborhood, lording their superiority over others' lives, bodies, and beings. It is where she learned her own spirit. She knew about propaganda and invasion of neighborhoods, and she would do something about it with her life. On the 22nd of November 2023, I announced a new book and cover in black and white with Audrey on the cover for a release on the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Within just weeks, Taylor Swift at the Grammys and on tour made my book announcement about herself, as always, transferring the phenomenal to her mundane me, self-centeredness, placing herself physically in the position of Audrey from More Lies, replacing Audrey Hepburn's body with hers, releasing it for the exact same planned date so that she can continue to be forced publicity and praise diversion, the focal point, have her war, while also being both its aggressor hero and its victim with her sadness from crimes she committed from day one, and sell it to fans ×4 while mimicking taking over university literature departments who did not suspect her plagiarism and abuses. The new black and white book cover announcement with Audrey in all her radiant beauty also has the brilliance of Willa Cather wearing a white fox cape on the back cover. Taylor's post, 6th of December 2023, 2 weeks later with her ugly, malignant personality showing her ability to control and dominate the press, dressed like Audrey with the words, "the biggest, the loudest, the most aggressively," and replacing My Breakfast at Tiffany's script with her music as a weapon and threat, and selling it to little girls as power and romance, actually her narcissistic effort to confuse and deflect from what is actually happening, while also unintentionally demonstrating the textbook fact that narcissists form no bonds with anyone but seek to own and control, while proudly claiming the bigger picture and influence she mimics, filling it with more romance lies daily. Truman Capote, after the crime of plagiarizing Breakfast at Tiffany's, sought to make it real life with the New York City socialites so that he could continue to have his writing as a power over others, and then to be able to rip them apart like a demon, as demons cannot stand anything beautiful. It isn't the real thing if it's a pattern, but always the victim. Poor Truman, look what he had to go through when he decided to hurt and manipulate people. But she's moronically wrong, as she was about John, in copying me about Michelangelo's Pieta, as she has been about everything else. It's not a work about a self-obsessed victim sufferer who can easily afford to take any kind of pictures of herself from her defrauding as many females on the planet as she can, and shoving it down people's throats with plagiarism and bought music from professional musicians. People don't understand that it is all purchase, and she throws some plagiarized self-centered lines at them to incorporate. That's what money can do to your art, which should match your soul, and mockingly throw help and arrogance at a few falsely framed as heroics to fan her fame she still desperately needs. Michelangelo's Pieta, when one looks closer, is a joyous internal radiance glowing through on Mary's face. Holding her erotic love in her arms, he completely surrendered to heaven in her and overcoming death through her, and in that revealing his divine self and second coming, his actual resurrection, where the Hebrew Bible scribes drifted off, not having insight into either Mary the Mother or Mary Magdalene, birth and death, and overcoming it eternally through her beingness. They didn't understand the ancient Greek mythology or the feminine mystery rites they were copying from the Iliad and Odyssey and writing the lives of Jesus and Mary in mythological terms. She is protecting and nurturing him the entire time as humanity dehumanizes him. His life, being, and body have no value to them, and she certainly does not. That is how the divine is closed on earth. That's why he has to leave for war in the first place, something he himself put into motion before anyone else. That is the genius, the prophet inside the ancient trickster tale. That too is the sacrifice he is willing to pay for the change on earth. They didn't understand the recognition Odysseus is about to experience in his olive tree bed, his ascension, where he shows his transformation through the mythological journey, situated every step of the way by the feminine, the goddesses causing insight and transformation through the right of the masculine to her, wherein, when he arrives at Penelope, he proves he knows her being and has brought the structure of the true kingdom to her. Everything is restructured, even though it appears as just a minor king off from the troubles of the feminine of Menelaus and Agamemnon. He transforms kingship on earth, actually opening the heavens, the divine in form, what is forbidden but forever hoped for. In the Paeda, the flow of the waters from her forms a river from her body through him, flowing his form to earth and the holy waters from which the body comes, the natural flow of her body, as witnessed in every birth. Michelangelo carefully understood in 1498-99 as he was sculpting what Jesus had said about the waters of Shiloh, healing the lame and the blind, with Jesus actually saying my name and even John's and my birth dates, 7 times 7. 500 years later, exact to that sculpture, John was starting out in masterful music. He arrived in Atlanta in 1998. This Jupiter-Uranus conjunction on the 21st of April 2024 is conjunct with the Saturn-Pluto opposition of Michelangelo's sculpting. His sculpture and my own natal Saturn-Uranus-Jupiter triple conjunction. By 1508, the years that matched the prophecy, he was painting the Sistine ceiling, which is a revelation of the name Shiloh, from the front door all the way to the back wall, with the back wall even miraculously containing my last name. The restoration of the Sistine began in 1477, exactly 500 years to John's birth. This is not stated in arrogance, but in a sense of wonder, not in not understanding, but in an open heart to the Pure Land, the dimension of being alive that humans can't see in the narcissistic inherited norms. It's a door that doesn't exist in that world. That's why we can go on hurting each other in all life forms. Thus, there is complete narcissism in making the female body just a receptacle for the lineage of tribes and control of property, and a misunderstanding of the song, art, and mythology that opens life, making her just a uterus to be monitored, owned, invaded, used, and blocked at will, like Trump is forced again in his malignant narcissism and his southern trucks of lynching hate, and imposing himself on the freedoms of body and being of American women, as if we need an authoritarian parent to make life decisions for us, when we are the in-between of eternity itself. I figured out some of this as a little girl when I was taught to read on the Hebrew Bible. But as Homer knew, this is not exactly something you run to the news with. I made light of it, telling John about my name and birth date in the prophecy of Genesis 49:10 in 2010. It was what the teenage fraud monster needed to salivate and be determined to lie and determined to sell John to make it to the top, even if she didn't know what the top is. When I was very little in Ohio, my dad made a Christian album with the face of Jesus on the cover entitled Face to Face. That is the mythology and Bible verse of these very recognition scenes. That made it even more surreal when John wrote A Face to Call Home in 2010 without knowing that, and the miracles that began happening with Willa's works the morning after he played it publicly for the first time in Greenwich Village, in the very neighborhood where she wrote. 2 streets over, 1 street over from the beginning of Breakfast at Tiffany's. for sale. Upon reading this, Taylor Swift, me. What money can buy you and leave everyone empty inside, no matter how far you take that money, who you steal it from, or who you abuse with it, then try to give yourself credit for the economy, like Donald Trump. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all the mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship or body to the flames that I may boast, but do not have love, I am nothing. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a woman, I put on the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three things remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. The love that moves the sun and other stars. Dante's last line of the Divine Comedy at the culmination of illumination with Beatrice. Michelangelo's Paeta, Audrey Hepburn, and the 1964 World's Fair. Peace through understanding. The publishing of Irving Stone's novel, The Agony and the Ecstasy, about Michelangelo's life, led to the Paeta traveling to New York City for the 1964 World's Fair entitled Peace Through Understanding. Stone's research and notes for the novel were done from translating Michelangelo's letters and by Stone living in places where Michelangelo lived and worked. After publication of the novel, Stone sent all of his research to the head librarian at UCLA, who was also the first editor of My Literary Journal, where it was first being published, begun in 1957, the year before Truman Capote's publication of Breakfast at Tiffany's from Willa's works. Audrey's effect on the culture in her arrival in Gigi on Broadway in New York City, Roman Holiday bringing to life the very spirit of the feminine of Rome, Sabrina and her mesmerizing effect on even the structure of business in New York City in the Larrabees, as well as showed that spirit would have her ethereal, light nature come to life in Green Mansions, her pivotal role in the nun's story that breaks out of the boundaries of the human spirit beyond religion to touch lives and become herself, and then the free, uncontainable spirit of Breakfast at Tiffany's was an arrival and a breakthrough of the feminine spirit following the human obliteration and devastation of World War II. Liveness and vibrancy likely played a role as the plans developed in 1961 for Michelangelo's Paeta at St. Peter's to come to New York City. The idea became possible because it had been made real. This was the first time the Paeta had ever left St. Peter's, taking a ship to New York City, since Michelangelo himself put it there like a thief in the night because it held a different message than a cathedral named for a St. Peter. The rock, the earth upon which the divine is built can't be a Peter because he cannot be the door to eternity, that is and always has been female. Michelangelo's sublime, radiant perfection of the feminine is made of the finest stone he could find, making her the rock on which the church is built, reclaiming the cathedral with her just as the earth is the living rock of life itself. For Audrey's role in the nun story in 1959, Audrey had come back to her birthplace for filming, also the home to Michelangelo's Bruges Madonna and Child, featured in the movie, and which delivers a distinctly different direction of Audrey's actions in the movie, just as Michelangelo's work does. As an altarpiece, a baby Jesus stepping playfully away to life, fullness, and beauty of life instead of being harmed and sacrificed is just what Audrey's character does. She's the Madonna walking out into life where she belongs. At the World's Fair, the Pieta was then photographed by Robert Hepburn, who began at first photographing it for artwork for a commemorative album of the music he had selected to play in the Vatican's exhibit. That artwork became legendary in its beauty, and because the Pieta had never been in a position to be photographed before, it was essentially their first photographs. This all led artist Maxine Pendry, within a few years in the late 60s, to paint the face of Jesus from the Pieta in a work inspired by the name of the novel, entitling her painting The Agony. That painting, reminiscent of me when Michelangelo's face, became the cover of my dad's gospel album, arriving at my doorstep when I was about 3 years old, listening to my dad record the album. I kept a copy of the album all my life, carrying that portrait, it becoming frayed and bleached out, me not knowing that it would lead me to the recognition scenes of the Homeric epics and to John, and to what it would mean to meet face to face and recognizing someone beyond normal recognition. I knew something of him from that first moment that was beyond real. That face-to-face also reveals through all of these happenings, also back to the face of the Pieta, and an astounding, illuminating realization of what Michelangelo has done in the details of the Pieta, especially the messages of their bodies, and thus also the feminine in place, becoming more impactful as it arrived in New York City, illuminating identity and the divine through her face, and a very different kind of beauty and identity. John's The Search for Everything World Tour in 2017 unintentionally, numerously began with him in the New Zealand Kapahaka, performing How Great Thou Art, which is the last track of my dad's album. They performed it as a tribute to Christchurch in New Zealand, which had recently had a terrorist attack on 2 mosques. January 2020 was our grand conjunction of Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn, a formidable aspect as we now know ourselves. The month I began publishing about the fraud, but that had not happened with all the planets in Capricorn since 1285, the time at which Dante knew of Beatrice in person. It was also the 700-year anniversary of the completion of the Divine Comedy, in which Beatrice is the divine illumination. Just as Homer's work on internal transformation, with Penelope remaining in her chamber, all the planet was pushed inward for the world transformative upturning, and all the wildlife could run free. In the fall of 2020, as I was writing about the Pieta, and particularly her dress, and how Princess Diana's wedding dress very much resembled it, and Taylor Swift then immediately appeared on Late Night with Seth Meyers wearing a Princess Diana revenge dress before then replicating Diana's wedding dress, and a dress I had been photographed in on Christmas 2013 for her Pieta replication for the re-release of her Fearless. I was writing about the sash across Mary's chest, with a wild discovery of my own that I had forgotten about. My dress, like it, had 2 sashes for the belt, meaning that there was one for across the chest, that Michelangelo signed her heart with his name. All of this was coming at the moment of our Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, with a cross formed in the cosmos, and a declination spacing of planets that had not happened since 1623, the very year and moment of the dedication of St. Peter's, and where something was amiss. Michelangelo's works were being undone as being definitive in St. Peter's by a shift in the artwork by Bernini, giving place to fraud as in monuments to St. Peter's and to St. Helena. More ostentatious, St. Helena, who claimed to find sacred relics to have more power through her son Constantine. In fall 2020, as I was studying the shift at St. Peter's at the year 1623, because the message of Michelangelo and the newly hired Bernini were importantly different, I started noticing the difference of dress choices between Michelangelo's Mary and the Pieta and Andrea Bolgi's dress on St. Helena, which marks the shift in the message of the artwork right at this 2020 declination. St. Helena would be commissioned at the exact moment of the declination in 1623. According to tradition, Helena ordered the Temple of Venus torn down according to legend that arose at the end of the 4th century, chose a site to begin excavating, which led to the recovery of 3 different crosses, one which came to be claimed to be the true cross, and then here, this was taking the place of what Michelangelo had done, his dome and artwork in St. Peter's. In Taylor's appetite for attention and fame, She then replicated the bodily position of Jesus and the dress for her album. A moment from what was happening in St. Peter's in 1623, and a throne built to him, something addressed on the walls of the Sistine, where a white dog instead steps down to the throne of the Pope, was mirrored here in New Mexico. Built between approximately 1610 and 1626, San Miguel Chapel in Santa Fe is considered by most to be the oldest church structure in the United States. Archaeologists, this Franciscan designed house of worship rests upon an early Pueblo settlement from circa 800 to 1300 CE, the time leading to exact dates of the writing of the Divine Comedy, also Michelangelo's inspiration. When the Paeta arrived into New York City in April 1964, exactly 6 years ago, with our total solar eclipse in April 2024, moving into the tightening Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, Audrey's movie, Paris When It Sizzles, about the feminine playing a farce about being lesser than, especially in writing and creation, was premiering. It is a movie that demonstrates again with screenwriter George Axelrod Truman Capote's plagiarism and acting like a somebody, while Audrey, true spirit, talent, intellect, carries the whole charade. Released that same year, all through My Fair Lady is the masculine that receives the glory and credit, but it is Audrey that through costuming in the flowers and gardens blooms into a rose that alters the blind, immovable structure of that society back into the heavenly garden on earth with the feminine understood. My Fair Lady premiered in October 1964, just as the Paeta was about to take a ship back to the Vatican in November, her one vacation, and that to New York City. Audrey's influence and far-reaching effect is far more profound than even her endurance explains. In My Fair Lady, no one believes the Eliza of the flower market selling flowers on the curb outside the Covent Garden Royal Opera, where her voice should be heard, could ever be anyone but a street urchin, and yet she is the flower itself needing to bloom against the pavement, blocking her. Mayfair, as in My Fair, is Jimi Hendrix's neighborhood too, like Greenwich Village. His next-door neighbor there, Adele, wrote the oratorio Messiah. Adding oddly to this fact is that the studio would not use Audrey's singing voice, but which is still a phenomenal classic from her spirit. It is her English pronunciation and enunciation, the very refinement of her language, being able to speak, that opens her blooming. There is certainly more at stake than how she speaks, but her speaking brings it all to fruition when she is able to articulate herself away from the old systems until she can bring the sunlight to them. The focus of the 3-hour musical is that not being seen or heard, not being granted humanness, and most of all not given any place on the planet we share. The silent backdrop to this is the voiceless suffragettes marching the band for the female vote. It is also placed up against middle-class morality, which is not morality at all, but what is advantageous. Mobility between classes blocked by not being seen as sentient or having value beyond servitude, and the market, and how social and gossip makes or breaks a fate. She overcomes this boundary when in her excitement at the horse races she accidentally blurts out in her Cockney accent to the racehorse, "Move your bloomin' 'arse!" Her realness breaks through at this fault in culture. It's the tectonic shift. It's the best moment of the whole stultified social scene, which is pointed out to move in choreographed unison, just as society is in what they can and cannot do. It is therefore more ironic how the studio erased Audrey's voice, as she was always speaking for others as well. The fault, the crack in the ground, is also signified in the ironic concrete or cobblestone flower market, which blocks flowers from growing. By the end of the film, Audrey is in full pink rose bloom, adding, as she arrives home, the soft, glowing pink rose blooming hat. In groundbreaking female author Willa Cather's 1931 narrative Shadows on the Rock, Willa saw what the feminine and the phenomenal prospects of the continent of North America and Canada are when she traversed the ocean, importantly coming from the roots of the grounded, vibrantly earthy heritage of France refined to lifestyle grace across centuries and brought to the rugged, rocky shores of French Quebec in 1697 an account of the city's important French heritage in a different light. Willa was doing something beyond daring, like Michelangelo, and doing it in a transcendent, masterful creation, and had the popular readers known in 1930s, her work would have been a shock to the ruling conservative opinions and structures that couldn't see the seeds of the feminine with the potentials of the rugged, raw, natural continent, and could not see especially upon the boulders on which it was being grown. It is in the same line, her outrageous audacity, and I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Willa was showing side by side the religion and infant culture of immigrants thought they were bringing Catholicism for their own structure and comfort in an untamed land, and the reality of the arrival of the feminine in a virgin of the rocks whose rooted cultural refined heritage of the hearth and home, that of the French farms and gardens, rituals, warmth, comforts, caring, and healing that were seeding and growing a very different culture, but forbidden except in that cultural heritage, knowing her worth, her care, her value, her centeredness, and now in this freedom, a natural, even wild land, doing so radically in the manner just as the religion, but this time very real and connected to life itself, to the feminine center, and her very real body and being. The potentialities of that feminine immigrant culture came to the land with that kind of heritage, yet now with the spatial freedom from class abuse, starvation, punishment, and tyranny. And Willa was creating that foundation in every step of her writing, even into the very female lineage of French royalty. I was in San Antonio, Texas, on the Riverwalk at the historic Catholic Ursuline Academy founded in 1851, also the time and similar setting of Willa's novel, photographing a sculpted bird fountain that would come to be just like Willa's Madeline in Death Comes for the Archbishop. On the 4th of December 2010, the morning after John first played A Face to Call Home at the Village Underground, only 2 blocks from her story Coming Aphrodite, it became Breakfast at Tiffany's that I would discover there. I had no idea he was going to do that. He sent the song to me Saturday morning, and that is when I knew that he loved me. I had been working on a short film for him entitled Until I Was 7 that he didn't know about. Aphrodite is set in Greenwich Village by Washington Square Park, where I went to see John in July 2010. Of course, that wasn't on my mind then, even though I had taught Southwestern literature. While suffering the fraud myself after what had happened to John in 2010, over the coming years, I would figure out how Truman Capote plagiarized Breakfast at Tiffany's partly from Willa's Coming Aphrodite, among her other works such as Flavia and Her Artist, wherein Flavia has swans. Truman was a complete fraud and an invasive liar, and Audrey Hepburn, a different kind of spirit, a different view of the world, knew it. Spirit made all the difference. It also established the magical place, a phenomenal occurrence with a different feminine, demonstrating the effect on place of the feminine Willa showed. World War II took 70 to 85 million lives and left children dying of starvation, effects of which Audrey had the rest of her life. The first detonation of an atomic bomb happened in my front yard at White Sands, right in between the births of my father, 44, and mother, 45, just like the order of the birth dates of my name, with mine in the middle. The Pluto cycle began at the beginning of 2008 when Pluto entered Capricorn, the house of structures, when through desperation and intuition, at that moment I walked into the oldest church on the continent in Santa Fe, New Mexico. besides indigenous sacred kivas on which the San Miguel mission is incredulously built, in the oldest capital city of the nation. In Audrey's Western, like the one I would make in 2010, The Unforgiven, her mother is played by the legendary actress Lillian Gish, who was in the first 12-reel film ever made, Birth of a Nation, in 1915. Audrey in The Unforgiven is born Kiowa, an outrageous statement of love breaking boundaries at the time with someone of red skin and strong inner spirit. This lineage of the first of feminine creation for Audrey reaches from Colette choosing her for Gigi, and that playwright being Anita Luce, the first female staff screenwriter in Hollywood. The mission where I was in February 2008 is off the square where Willa Cather found her inspiration for the very different feminine America, a very different founding, and wrote it coming to life right there in the garden at the end of San Francisco Street, right up from the camera shop I walked into, across from Willa's Hotel, and a fortuitous photograph she made there. In 2008, Pluto's move into Capricorn onto the world stage was the 500th anniversary of 1508 when Michelangelo began to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling with my name. I walked into that first church on the continent exactly 500 years to the moment that he started, completely unaware of it. I was seeking solace in the mission and taking photographs. Those beginning years of the 1500s also coincided with the naming of America, after one of Michelangelo's Italian neighbors, Amerigo Vespucci, America being the female version. As it comes together, we can see that this is what Willa was writing, the Madeline of America, which she would return from Santa Fe in 1912 to Greenwich Village to write. The same year she sold the first story of Breakfast at Tiffany's, The Bohemian Girl. But with her realization in the Southwest in Santa Fe, she knew where she was taking it. That street where I was in 2008 was leading directly to a cathedral. It was also leading to Audrey Hepburn's iconic Fifth Avenue moment. We are also in a critical Pluto return in this moment of both the American and French revolutions for the cause of human rights, the two formative cultures important in Willa Cather's writing for insight, autonomy, and the end of despotism and narcissistic abuse over human life, for our nation, country, and world which is threatened by the grasp of malignant narcissistic personality disorder, which is intensely, emptily self-centered and purposefully destructive for its own greed, an intense appetite for hate and destruction. In this moment, Pluto has just moved into Aquarius, the house of the people, and Odysseus's dining hall. The beginning of 2008 is also when Taylor Swift went public in May 2008 in People magazine, unsolicited by John Mayer and already voraciously copying him and his colleagues. With her manipulations to the press about John, her kind of poetry, manipulative weaving of invasive lies is the untrue narration of our lives in our music, and hers is false, repeated, as opposed to internally realized and always true repetition that naturally happens with music. And her forced song getting the press, which should be the voice of consciousness and awareness, and the public to repeat third-hand lies as gossip truth, knowing and playing off of that people will repeat gossip as truth without fact-checking. Her power and profit rely on that false structure of disseminating untruths. And yet the cosmos was weaving a bit better weaver.
Songs, poems, stories.
Odysseus built the bed for Penelope coming from a live olive tree, a place of peace, the meaning of my name, Shiloh, and the very long-awaited consummation of their relationship. John and I saw each other for the first time on the 1st of April, April Fool's Day, 2010, which was also the Thursday of Easter weekend, the day of the beginning of the Divine Comedy. These are our lives, our bodies, our beings, our eternities. We share an earth, and you are not welcome to destroy it. It is a gift, a paradise on this side and beyond the veil, the door. We pick up on falling in love with John Mayer in Greenwich Village, New York City in 2010, the actual site of Breakfast at Tiffany's, before Truman Capote's fraud and Taylor's. The day that John arrived in Europe for his solo tour spring 2024, French lawmakers on Monday, March 4th in the Palace of Versailles overwhelmingly approved the bill to enshrine abortion rights in France's constitution, making it the only country to explicitly guarantee a woman's right to voluntarily terminate her pregnancy. Taylor isn't a wild, passionate, no-holds-barred renegade for girls. She's an abuser in the hallway, and the girl she's beating up and getting everyone to gang up on is going home to commit suicide because nobody cares. That's the reality, the climate she operates in, the radical climate we are living in. People are going home from giving her their earned money to figure out how to pay the heat bill. She might be helping out the Hiltons, but she is not changing the world. She keeps it the same to reap those old benefits. She sees herself, as narcissists do, as a unique, misunderstood person that waits for people to come up against her, lies in wait for it so that she can say, "I told you I'm the victim," without end. In this way, she sees herself as special and needs others to see her as special, and so keeps using the same old tactics. This is how her hell on earth is created. Quotes are from Dr. Les Carter about known narcissistic patterns. 1 in 3 girls have considered suicide during Taylor's celebrated tenure as an abuser. Not do it for love by any means, and she is in no way a victim. She purposely did it to bring harm to others so that she could force what she demanded. She did it to have power, control, and ownership over other grown, successful adults. The music never belonged to her. She stole it and bought writers and musicians to carry out the facade, infiltrating the halls of true creation and change. For capitalism, illegally exploiting cash and credit off of everyone, she's an exploiter of publicity and fame.
Once I learned that the press doesn't really want the truth. They just want what will sell to the greatest number of people, even if it's hurtful and harmful, that they didn't actually care. Even if there had been relationships there, I thought I was building with them with honesty and openness, with the public, a love, a meaningfulness, a purpose, a realness, even room for playfulness. Then I knew that wasn't the game I was playing for.
Right before the pandemic in March 2020, right before the world would go quiet, John filmed an adventure with Land Rover Defender and the Atlantic at the Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park.
Don't you feel like a kid playing like we were about to get in trouble? There's a reason people call it escape, because you really are kind of slipping the bonds of something.
I live by the Lincoln National Forest. I taught college folklore at Sul Ross State University, Rio Grande College in Uvalde, Texas in the summer of 2004, with 2 news stories in the Uvalde Leader News newspaper, dated 17th of June and 8th of July 2004, covering projects in the folklore classes. During the very beginning of the pandemic, I was writing an article online about Bob Dylan and the Grateful Dead and how the music never stopped, and all the wondrous things that have come with that. Taylor then took the article and its theme and ideas and reproduced it for Disney. She took the covers and titles of my books, Coyote Weaves a Song, a mythological song from the beginning of time, for folklore and evermore, and even Anti-Hero, or Adele, and placed herself in the woods, stalking, hurriedly buying music to get it out quickly during the pandemic and using my ideas exactly. Happier, she copied a plaid jacket I was wearing in the woods and placed herself in the position of my dogs on the covers. They are facing towards the peak of a sacred mountain, where the eagle flies, as in the Odyssey.
That's not music at all. That's all that Taylor Swift wanted, was that press, and she was willing to lie about me to get it. She was very willing. And then they tried to call that love. I was flabbergasted, and I had to go back into the depths of music to find the real way again. Her harassment fed to the press covertly never stopped. It's documented in the press every moment since that time, and the press and public don't care. They just repeat it as truth, like that I dated Taylor. But really it's happening to all of us. Narcissism is destructive to all of us. It tries to harm and deflect from the very moments of our lives.
Why did Taylor press for a doctorate from NYU and Greenwich Village, where I came to know John? Even though I had earned the hours and had the writing, I purposely left the institutions without the doctorate. I knew I was going to write and create. She did it to downgrade everyone beneath her and to have the voice of authority and the ability to own anything that malignant narcissists like Trump demand. And dress up like Willa Cather from When Willa Wore a White Fox Stole Around Her Neck in Paris, a wonderful statement about what she was up to, which also has to do with the white dog and the Sistine frescoes, right after I wrote about it on my online literary journal, and use it for a publicist's fourth Time magazine cover, and this also being a writer who lived and wrote in Greenwich Village, where Taylor decided to originate her lies to attach herself to John. And lie about having a relationship with Joe Alwyn, a friend of One Direction, there in Greenwich Village, 1 street over from John performing a face to call home for me, and she doing so in a rented apartment as I had done to see John there in 2010. How would an uneducated, narcissistic teenager abuser, whose dad has been hawking her since childhood to marketing firms and who's only interested in money and power over others, know the depths of the brightest hard-won minds of literature, the greatest minds to have ever lived, like Michelangelo, which is the deepest insight into life itself? She wouldn't. She wouldn't even know how to write pop hooks. She was copying and handing it to professional writers and musicians, but posing as the writer for legitimacy and status like John, Nora, Cheryl, and Alicia had. Her competitive mindset didn't make for the countless hours of labor and love it takes to learn and grapple with music. She was after the prize, whatever she had to do in the landscape of the industry. not the internal spaces. And beyond that, understand Willa Cather's white fox stole. And beyond that, understand Willa's white fox stole in Paris. It wouldn't even occur to her feeble, disturbed brain. She's an empty, jealous imbecile with the worst characteristics of American culture. It is invasive, abusive, and sadistic, lauded as feminism, girl next door, money, economy, and influence, as if those things are intrinsically good. For whom? Who is it benefiting? It's actually the creation of a hostile environment, the opposite of Audrey Hepburn, of art and inspiration of life. The city never defined Audrey's spirit, not even New York City or Paris. Instead, she opened up a dimension of them that would be mere structures without her spirit, opening them to aliveness. I acquired a malignant teenage stalker in 2010 when I came to know John. It wasn't cute and it wasn't funny as online tried to make her out to be. She latched onto me like a demon to show herself proudly to be extremely aggressive because I was private and I had wonderful otherworldly content, even that she could not recognize the extent of. She just wanted to sell it, and that would make her more special, and she felt entitled, as narcissists always feel entitled, and calling it revenge, her fantasy, for my true relationship with John, and because we could not be forced public. It fair game to her, with John's kindness in protecting himself and his music from the damage to his reputation. She knew she could get away with it, even flaunt it as narcissists suspect that they can. With unwary people and press, they are willing to go lower than anyone else and pride themselves on it. John had been immensely kind, even giving unwarranted praise, knowing what was actually happening in the creative department, but giving her that leeway and opportunity to be original, the reason to do so, in an effort to pay any price to get her to kindly quit trying to force a fantasy, especially publicly. The backlash against Kanye speaking out didn't work. It gave her more of an opening with the public. John was gentle, kind, and self-deprecating to her in public in extreme kindness just 4 months before her vicious public global attack, with John even making kind, laudatory statements about her songwriting to give her enough praise to give up on him kindly. It's what victims of narcissism often do. Think that kindness has to work. It doesn't. They're going to do anything to get what they want. Narcissists have learned what behavior works on people, to look vulnerable, honest to everyone else, to appear as the victim. But that very evening, Taylor wore a flower in her hair like John's lyric song Do You Know Me, while being lauded for original writing, as a threat to what I had been legitimately writing online about my movie from 2007 about finding a relationship from the past, and John's song that she was already mimicking both that night, trying to force John in public. The lavender she wore was an offensive reference to the opening scene of my film in a little red Corvette and John's having sung from Prince's Purple Rain on tour, injecting herself into intimate connections from stalking him online. John was doing what he had to do while showing love to me, that he would do anything he had to do to be with me. That act of kindness threatened his entire career. Taylor was presenting herself in endless publicity stunts as having other boyfriends to gain attention and keep a contrived narrative going, giving herself fake rom-com roles. Her ongoing harassment of John never stopped for one day, all of which has been documented, the press and public conveniently overlooking the covert harassment. Do anything to have a story of herself, like Truman, like Trump, and what an extraordinary story, existence, is not hers. In that lesser, mindless destruction of a world where life doesn't matter, there is an intense need to grab and rip everything truly beautiful apart, to tear it to pieces, to be able to consume the sublime. In my very different world, which includes suffering and coming to understand suffering, the beauty becomes more and more solid, real, and sacred in spite of intense ugliness, even coming to understand where it comes from, the roots of it. It has driven me further into immense beauty, alive in every breath. I've had to give myself to it more, go deeper, which is not public. There are many doorways to it, but none known in that former hard-mind world where hate instead is spread without awareness of the hell it creates. They can't even see the doors, they lie within the breath, let alone know they exist, more real than anything on the temporal plane, but that give truer life to every wonder of existence. The differences in understanding suffering, as Thich Nhat Hanh began showing in the 1960s during the Vietnam War. A little unimportant boy from Vietnam come to show America with his own being what peace and place of peace are, and then being exiled from his own home for 40 years, double that of Odysseus, showing what people will do. But from understanding, learning joy, understanding America, and from there creating something beautiful that nurtures and protects beingness, which can even love and nurture eternity, and thrives on a different kind of natural, not grabbed abundance. I follow it, my feet against the earth, kiss for kiss, and that is how I find the immense insights, the looking deeply. As Ty called it, breakfast in the ultimate. We followed the steps of my Bichon Moonbeam, beyond death, like Beatrice. That is my path to continue to give love and nurturance beyond form. And in the immensity of his passing, we found the walls of the Sistine with the white dog in the frescoes, leading me to look up and find the most amazing patterns leading to my own name and wondrous revelation, and what it means across the globe for everyone, from the Sistine front door to the back wall, all waiting for the moment when we could recognize it. An astounding cosmic weave. Followed my teacup Yorkie vanilla custard pudding, as I had followed him in the woods, our steps together, that us, togetherness, everything into interbeing, we, his tiny, courageous heart, and we found the Dharma Hatu. We dwell in the ultimate. We started founding it in the caves of the Chauvet, in our New Mexico, right where Willa saw it come to pass, and we followed it beyond the crossing. That's where you'll find me, the crossing of the Paella. Its inspiration is ineffable, but recognizable if one goes deep enough into the breath. Oh my joy, oh my happiness. And through it, it would be ineffable to her. And that is why I do not worry about Taylor Swift's slopped for sale inane lyrics and images of herself, padding her Wikipedia with lies to mimic, her teeth gnashing machinations to tear everything beautiful apart in her inner hell she incorporates other people into. I'm not buying, and this isn't for sale.
It wants to inject pain. Music is actually a totally different transport than that. If you are not actually transported to broader horizons outside of the harm, the pain, of culture, of the press, then you are actually trapped in that being made to feel less than and angry. Music takes flight. It moves the soul. It broadens the skies. It heals. It holds your hand. It makes sure you make it through. It expands and moves us to more wonderful things, what we are meant to be, what we're cosmically designed to be. Things we never dreamed possible.
In 2015, I was writing about wild connections in books of how the cosmos comes together in more extraordinary ways than I think any human could dream up, like a working network of the greatest artists and writers who ever lived and who care deeply, and always have, about what is happening. I often feel like that, like Michelangelo is still with us, still sculpting time, as in how my name and birth date and birthplace and all that has come with it, has come about. That's a masterful, unfathomable creation that I get to live. I feel that about my dad all the time, who passed in 2019, a creator with his hands who always made me things of wood and heart shapes, and made me a pair of animatronic, robotic, life-size wings for a movie I wanted to make, and even helped me film The Apocalypse of the Heart, something like Olivia's short film music video with wings. An action of his now that I treasure, and how he showed care and love through creation. He is my Da Vinci, to create anything he could dream up. I feel it too, like at the Dead and Company shows how Jerry and the other beloved members aren't gone at all, but are all there having a very good time and laughter and joy. When I reread the first rung of Dante's Inferno and all the great artists and philosophers there, it felt personal, like I was meeting them all in this state of unrecognition, waiting for Dante to understand, like John joining the lineage of great poets and bring about that realization to illumination. That's one reason it was so fun to hear Bob Weir sing, "I may be going to hell in a bucket, babe, but at least I'm enjoying the ride." I could clearly see him guiding John through the levels of hell so that he'd understand what had historically happened. It was outrageous to discover that this wildly artistic vision is a feminist text about the pinnacle that artists can take the songs to and bring about in the world. A book I wrote about in 2015, already knowing the miracles of my birth date and John's in place, that would develop so much further with Willa and the French refined culture that I grew up with, and where Willa would even take the importance in that French cuisine. My dogs and I went into a local bookshop in Rue d'Ossa and found Luke Barr's Provence 1970, M.F.K. Fisher, Julia Child, James Beard, and the reinvention of American taste. About, quote, a singular historic moment. In the winter of that year, more or less coincidentally, 6 iconic culinary figures, including Julia Child, James Beard, and M.F.K. Fisher, found themselves together for a few weeks in the south of France. They cooked and ate and talked late into the night about the future of food in America, the meaning of taste, and the limits of snobbery. Here were Americans' leading culinary voices, joined also by renowned cookbook editor Judith Jones, gathered together in Provence, each of them making sense of this historical moment. The connections came alive for me. I grew up with a mother who decorated her home in provincial French blue furniture and guarded her kitchen her exquisite ability to cook and entertain, mixed with my dad being a minister, a combination of the strains of Willa's Death Comes for the Archbishop, and beginning right in Ohio, where the Archbishop begins his travels, to where I live now, stopping off in San Antonio with his books, where I lived on the ranch. For Willa, that French cooking would take on supreme importance in her Shadows on the Rock. And so Luke Barr's book, Provence 1970, was my birth year in a place that had been so pivotal in my impressionable years. But further, it was also tied to the first editor and publisher of my literary journal, Books of the Southwest, a close friend of M.F.K. Fisher's, even joining her in France, and a close literary circle of rule-breaking authors from Henry Miller to Ernest Hemingway, even the first editor of Esquire, where John would come to write articles at the beginning of his career, and all of this literary coming forth at the moment of the music renaissance on the West Coast. My journal, tagline from 1957 as Southwestern Americana, was first published just 2 days before the arrest for reading and selling Allen Ginsberg's Howl, a friend of Bob Dylan's, Patti Smith. Another reason I went to see John in Greenwich Village. Barr's book is also about Fisher's last house in San Francisco, which Taylor then took to craft a female historical mythology, trying to mythologize herself from me with matching details with her invasive Watch Hill John mimicry, and she glaring out bay windows trying to also mimic Penelope waiting, as I have been writing about for many years. M.F.K. Fisher is known as a sensualist food writer, and discovering this after I had sent John pictures early on baking sexy desserts for him. And all that would continue to develop in the phenomenal discovery of the writing through the years, but most importantly, how it was always coming to life for us. I had also posted a photo of Maud Son's song artwork of 1970 released in 2014, and in true fashion, as she had done since her entry into Opportunity, Taylor plagiarized it all. It made her glands flow, an appetite to make it all about her, illegal infringement and all, so long as it was all about her empty self, trying to fill its bottomless pit, trying to steal the cosmos for her own greed, trying to take down the wondrous, the sacred, without concern with anybody else. In July 2010 at Jones Beach, John talked to me from the stage about the movie Say Anything, a romantic comedy about a high school graduation that was released in 1989, the year I graduated. He was doing this in humor because my blog was not being personable enough, like the character of Diane Court, a bit too intellectual for a blooming relationship with a Lloyd Dobler. Willa's picture of San Francisco Street in Santa Fe, 1925, the setting of the novel before the publication of Death Comes for the Archbishop in 1927. Coming Aphrodite in Greenwich Village had already been published in 1920 about the fleeting moment of what hadn't been realized that summer there. Willa on the Balcony of La Fonda Hotel opened in 1922 in Santa Fe, standing in front of the cathedral, herself as the door. I walked into Willa's picture in 2008, up this street and into a camera shop right across the street from this photograph, the balcony overlooking it. That was the moment exactly 500 years after Michelangelo painted a picture of my name above the door of the Sistine. I had no idea this was happening. Michelangelo's sash was the only time he signed his name, and this is on Mary's heart on the Pieta. And here Willa has purposefully put a bow on her heart. She's wearing a hat with a reference to a fruit tree. Greenwich Village begins Fifth Avenue itself, coming to a moment in October 1960 where the road would miraculously clear for Audrey and the iconic street scene. The Pieta, Jesus and Mary themselves would arrive with Audrey to New York City. Willa's Coming Aphrodite, the setting and characters of Breakfast at Tiffany's. What Willa created through knowing her internal being, as author Lewis Hyde shows of the Trickster, becomes prophetic. The fraudulent tried to derail it, take it for itself. Somehow the cosmic trickster loves a trick, even in the eternal.
Unrealistic approach to self-impressions as well as economics.
We're going to have trouble. She's a thinker. We throw ourselves at your mercy. Haven't poor, helpless people like us a right to make a living?
I have asked you to leave. That is my right. If the rights of the individual are not respected by the group itself cannot exist for long.
I think we ought to use her in the shop. Miss,
Okay.
will you come down here, please?
Me?
Just as atmosphere. You'll be selling a book to that girl.
Her?
It's very simple. Just pretend that Marion can read.
Say, listen!
All right, Marion, let's go.
But this would be an absolute violation of all my principles. It would be hypocrisy for me to lend myself to this sort of idealism. I'm sorry.
Oh, shush. Now tell Marion about the book so that we can get out of here.
This book deals with epiphenomenalism, which has to do with consciousness as a mere accessory of physiological processes whose presence or absence makes no difference. Whatever are you doing?
All right, hold it.
The fact that I can have you put in jail now for the last time.
You're getting very tiresome.
What are you doing? Let go of my arm.
I know you don't mean any harm, child, but you are in everyone's way. Now, we won't be a moment.
Let me in.
The air will do her good. She was very pale.
While I was walking up New McDougal and Bleecker Streets communicating with John as he left for the rest of his Battle Studies tour in July 2010, I went to the Village Underground into the Olive Tree Cafe and then right up the block purchased a pink cashmere-like wrap from a boutique street booth. I would later find that it matched Joe Stockton's Audrey's Characters Coming Out moment in Funny Face in 1957, the year of my book journal, from starting at a bookshop right there in Greenwich Village. But right there by Washington Square Park, in the beginning of Fifth Avenue, oh, the discoveries to come. John's lyrics in A Face to Call Home, Village Underground, December 2010, before we knew what wonders was happening, besides falling in love. I am an architect of days that haven't happened yet. I can't believe a month is all it's been. You know my paper heart, the one I filled with pencil marks. I think I might have gone and inked you in. Taylor Swift trying to tear it all down in 2014. Got a long list of ex-lovers. They'll tell you I'm insane, but I've got a blank space, baby, and I'll write your name. But the cosmos. Michelangelo has already signed his name to her heart, 500 years to the year John went to Atlanta. And death comes for the archbishop. The archbishop hires a French architect to build a church of his Magdalena, made out of the golden stone right from the mountains of Santa Fe, where I live, the land of enchantment, on a sacred mountain of the Mescalero Apache tribe. Taylor replicated that for Enchanted to Meet You in 2010. The day that I arrived in Santa Fe on Sunday, the 10th of February 2008, John was performing No One with Alicia Keys at the 2008 Grammys. It was the 500th anniversary of the beginning of the Sistine and the 50th Grammys. This was the year before the onslaught of Anglo wins and backlash that Kanye would speak out about the following year and was censured publicly. John was about to lose his personal right to choose whom he dated. The narcissistic hate to be poured out for many years to come was a public punishment and control measure. On the night of the 50th Grammys in February 2008, John had just filmed Where the Light Is 2 months earlier, on the 8th of December 2007. It would be released in July. At that same time, on the 18th of October, I had photographs taken on a river near my ranch with a vintage Gibson Epiphone guitar, whose provenance was said to have been worked on by Stevie Ray Vaughan's guitar tech. I had no idea at the time that that was John's guitar tech, or that he had those initials tattooed on his arm. My mother's maiden name is Vaughn, and my initials are SR. The photographs of the river do not show my face, as I did not want to upset the clients for whom the pictures were an advertisement. The pictures were very much like Beatrice arriving at the river. In Willa's moment, before the Pied arrived on the 13th, 14th of April 1964, there was another ship coming to New York City, an ostentatious, unsinkable one. This one in the very moment in April 1912 that Willa stepped foot in Arizona for that life-altering realization of the golden ground and homes of the earth and cliff dwellings, like the body itself that would become her realization of her body and being, and her truer lineage of the feminine in the Song of the Lark and Breakfast at Tiffany's. She would have gotten the news that the Titanic sunk the moment she arrived, beginning to go down on the night of the 14th of April and sinking in the early morning hours of the 15th of April, 1912, 112 years ago in this moment. Those dates are also in my name. Upside down 4145.
Fame and money and lies can never touch that, never go there. They just create a hell on earth for everyone in anger and violence and hatred. No one ever heals that way. No one gets better. Better things don't happen. So it does matter. It matters big. That's the human spirit continually moving above and beyond abuse, which is what this world is trapped in. I wasn't going to go down with the trapped world around me when I was 14 and all the pain, and I certainly wasn't going to do it at 32, with all that I had already been given. And I won't do it at 46. Even when the press is still interested in insignificant things like what they're being fed as innocuous entertainment and contrived, transactional seeking publicity. It matters in every single life, here and beyond. So the lies and the abuse do matter. The actual music matters. The truth matters, not just about me, but for all of us.
I saw that John was going to have a public love story with Shiloh, that he was going to give that to someone else instead of me after all I had been doing to put it out there and put it in the press, and she was a nobody. I was on his trail hard, and he had no right to turn me down. None whatsoever. Shiloh was a writer, and that was great for me because I could pick up material and no one would know who she was or care about what she wrote and who would believe her. I'm rich and famous.
In Willa's novel Death Comes for the Archbishop, the Isleta, New Mexico mission is the place where there's a wooden parrot, metaphorically signifying it is closed, repetitive art and religion, deadened to dogma and unchanging, and only repeating what it has heard. In the novel, this wooden parrot is juxtaposed with the real birds with the prized colored feathers for ceremony, kept in the walled-in garden. This is a pivotal point in the transition of the church in the novel, of which the Archbishop is the architect, that he creates inspired by Magdalena, whose spirit and being comes to life in his garden when she is surrounded by birds, the metaphor of her being in all of nature, her spirit coming to life and importantly embodied. In the western that I had made with my dad, the minister, we had filmed Wild Horses right by Isleta in 2006, coming from Texas. More was to happen there. When my moonbeam passed in 2015, I could see the white dog in the frescoes of the Sistine, leading to what I would realize in the patterns of Michelangelo's ceiling, with no idea at that point that it was about my name. I just saw the Sibyl holding an open, huge book at the back altar, and I was writing a book, trying desperately to console myself and Custard from this huge shift. But I also see patterns, and have all my life, the deep patterns like in the cosmos, and just by looking up at the white dog, which I would not likely have noticed without the intensity of what was happening. And looking up, I could already tell what Michelangelo had done, and it was all about the feminine. The creator, and in this case Michelangelo, was pointing to the moon. During the pandemic in 2020, I posted a private article about a New York Times photograph of a Bichon in front of large cathedral doors. Taylor immediately copied it with putting herself in front of large closet doors for a Capital One commercial, holding up a credit card, proudly, covertly showing her tapping phone calls that are recorded for evidence, as that was ongoing part of her hidden personal harassment, and flaunting her schizophrenic personas for the forced continued world fraud.
My dad raised me to be about money and be ruthless and take out anyone in the way. Faith Hill was stupid for walking on the stage for me after I stole from her. But everybody is stupid except me, obviously. Fame is power and I've got all of it. Nobody saw that coming, that I would be the most powerful. The joke's on them now. The story of being with John was worth more to me than to a nobody. I could do more with it because I had fans who cared about who I was dating. They still care because I can pull the press and paparazzi even if I'm not even interesting and it doesn't ever lead anywhere. I have no depth, no personality, nothing to say. I take off the makeup and I'm just scary. I'm just fame hungry.
But Homer wasn't bemoaning his fate, nor Odysseus. He was taking the path he had to take in order for the gods to shift the perspectives, transform the symbols, alter and open the world back from not seeing him for what he is, who he is, by a narcissistic culture, not allowed to be, or they'll kill you. That's narcissism from 3,000 years ago passed down to us as if that's the way things have to be, always suffering. Nothing is allowed to be. Nothing is sacred but what is behind lock and key of the power, control, ownership, punishment, abuse, killing, and money. But there is another lineage from Odysseus, the Medes. And neither were Virgil or Dante or Michelangelo bemoaning their fates. They put their hands to the artwork that would transcend the bounds of human creation and show how it goes into the divine, thus showing the divine hands as they had no choice. The corruption, the killing, the greed reached its heights of bold arrogance, bold on its seeming kills. And that is what we all had to do. I wasn't just writing to sell books. I had not promoted them or myself. I was writing to cross the boundaries into the cosmos, into the sublime, not possible by mere human hands and not something at all I could do alone, but I had to. And so we kept our hands weaving with the cosmos. Meet and greet, 18th of July 2017. Custard and I and Moonbeam had been alone for 7 years since first beginning a relationship with John, seeing each other for the first time the 1st of April 2010, him asking for writing on the 22nd of April, and me writing him first on the 27th of April 2010, and then seeing him in New York City in July. I have gone alone and left alone from many concerts across that time, but I have spoken to John every day. I have only accidentally spoken to him on the phone one time. He has never called me. We rely on different means. I will tell you a bit more, and you will start to understand. When John arrived to the meet and greet, he was in a tent area right next to us, and we could hear his voice. Custard had waited patiently with me in the heat for hours, and he was tired. But when he heard John's voice, his head popped up and he started looking around to see him. He knew his voice. It was wonderful to watch him be excited, not because this guy was famous, but because he knew that caring voice. At that meet and greet, John did something tremendously hard, besides holding Custard's head in his hands and singing daughter solo to him, essentially telling him to take care of me. In Homer's Odyssey, there are two pivotal telling moments upon the return of Odysseus, where Odysseus adamantly keeps his return and identity from Penelope because it would get him killed by the intruders in the dining hall, in other words, his music hall. The first is while he is first talking to Penelope as a stranger, when he meets with her in front of the hearth in the dining hall, and where his handmaiden recognizes him by his scars while bathing his feet like Jesus, although Jesus hadn't been born yet. But Odysseus does not let her say it out loud. For thousands of years, scholars have said Penelope doesn't recognize him, but in careful consideration of what is said between them, it is clear Penelope is in on what is going down. She will provide him with the full poetry and his lyre for taking back the dining hall. It will not be until later when Penelope says in front of this stranger that she will have her bed moved that we know she knows who she's talking to, as Odysseus built that bed from a live olive tree, and because it has deep, deep roots, it can't be moved, and both of them know that. It is the significance of their relationship. No one needs to know about the tree but the two of them. No one knows of the roots but him, because he knows her and how immovable she is on this relationship, waiting for him. Immovable to those invaders in the dining hall even after 20 years. That tree, too, is the Mount of Olives, where later Jesus would ascend to heaven as Odysseus is about to do in bed with Penelope. Oh yes, the Mount of Olives by the waters of Shiloah that run into the holy city of ancient Jerusalem, where Jesus says my name and says to go wash in the waters to heal blindness, very similar to the Odyssey and the flow through Jesus' body in the Paillada. And so in the meet and greet with John, I did not act like I knew John, and he did not act like he knew me. Instead, he talked and sang to Custard. I told him Custard recognized his voice. We took a picture together, 2 pictures. I put my arm around his back. I could feel his arm around me. I leaned against his big, strong chest. I walked away. Custard must have thought we were crazy. When Odysseus returns to Ithaca, one of the hardest things a man could do would be to walk by his dog that has been waiting for him for 20 years. But Odysseus does it. Argus is sleeping, and Odysseus knows what he has to do, and he can't have recognition. And so while his own heart breaks in not being able to run to Penelope, that he's made it home, not grabbing up his dog, he walks on to take on the dire invaded situation. It will make all the difference in the definition of a king, also protecting Penelope's value and identity, who will then reveal his transcendent nature in the recognition of her and her inner being, her interbeing with the cosmos. I had a front row ticket to see John that night. I was too stricken to stand there. I couldn't stop the gush of tears. I held Custard and we stood in the back on a hilltop and watched from afar. The next morning we got up and went to the University of New Mexico to research our old book journal and to keep writing with a flood of tears. Now it has been another 7 years. I've never stopped writing the tapestry, the shroud that isn't a shroud for who you think is come and gone, who you think might be dead.